And we're back with the rest of our vocabulary builder. So we're just gonna jump right in and not mince words. We're gonna just get down to the words, and we are leaving off where we stopped last time. So if you'd like, you can watch part 1. I'll link that in the description. But this is a perfectly lovely place to start as well. We're just going through some strange, interesting, funny, useful words to build our vocabularies or refresh them, and I hope you'll join us for that. So we left off with the word paplum, and now we're moving on to a very different kind of word, and this is a word that you might not find in the dictionary. Remember how I talked when we were looking at the word guga about words that start as slang and then become sort of officially codified or defined as real words, right? So with a living language, we're constantly evolving both how we use the words that exist and which words exist to begin with. This is one of those words that is actually slang, but it is not new. It is very old. It's Old English slang, but you still will hear it used. And that word is cottywomple. Cottywomple. So let's write it out. And I'm curious, for those of you who are British, is this a word that is very commonly known and widely used, or is this your first time hearing it? It is spelled C-O-D-I, so Coddy, and then it's actually, oh, you know what? It's 2 D's. Look at me making mistakes already. Okay, so C-O-D-D, Coddy. So C-O-D-D-I-W-O-M-P-L-E. Cottywomple. Cottywomple, and I'll show it to you. Cottywomple. Okay. It sounds like a villainous animal in a Winnie the Pooh story. Like, oh, here comes the cottywomple. It's actually a good thing though, cottywomple. So cottywomple is an Old English word, and again, Old English slang, and it means to travel with purpose to an unknown destination. Okay, so to travel with purpose. Think operatively, with purpose. With purpose. To an unknown destination. Okay, so cottywomple. And the reason I say that the with purpose is so operative is because this is to distinguish it from meaning just to be lost, right? So to cottywomple means that you are, following your sense of adventure, or, a need for fulfillment that comes from travel. It's not an accident, it's just that your final destination or your stops along the way aren't prearranged. So you could cottywomple your way across Middle Earth, led by just your willingness to wander and the beckoning aroma of fresh lambus bread. So, cottywomple. It's a nice idea. Okay. The next word is pulchritudinous. Pulchritudinous. This might be the most polysyllabic word on the list today, maybe. Pulchritudinous. So let's spell it carefully. So it's P U L Pul Crit. So C H R Pulchrit. I T U Pulchritu. T I N O U S. Pulchritudinous. It's a spelling bee word for sure. Pulchritudinous. So pulchritudinous, even though it's long, has a simple definition, and that is beautiful. Beautiful. Are you relieved? It's a nice, easy definition. Pulchritudinous means beautiful. So, why pulchritudinous? Why not just say beautiful, right? We have lots of words that mean pretty, so why do we need this big word? So clunky, right? I think that this is one of those really good cases for why we have so many different words. It really depends on your intention and the situation, and I think using pulchritudinous instead of pretty is, for one, much more grandiose, right? And it's more formal. Okay, so with 5 syllables, it stretches out this sentiment, rather than just saying you're pretty or you're hot, you know. I think pulchritudinous really allows the person who is giving the compliment and the person who is receiving the compliment a real moment to revel in it. So pulchritudinous, right? If you want something that feels very formal and, let's be honest, very deliberately flattering, I think pulchritudinous is a word that allows that sentiment to really linger, right? You can think of it being used a lot in the days of kind of more formal, old-fashioned courting. But I don't know, maybe try it, see how it goes. Pulchritudinous. Maybe it's a little over the top, but I don't know, still a word worth knowing. Especially because, to me, it doesn't sound that lovely, pulchritudinous. So, you know, it's worth knowing in case somebody calls you pulchritudinous, and then you can, you know, instead of being offended by it, like, what? Like, what did you call me? You can know that somebody just thinks you're lovely. So, okay. So, pulchritudinous. The next word is vituperative. Vituperative. So that's a V I T U P E R A T I V E. Vituperative. 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 Okay? Vituperative. And vituperative means bitter and abusive. Bitter and abusive. Not very pretty. Bitter and abusive. And typically when we talk about something vituperative, we're talking about very often words, right? As in a vituperative attack on one's characters. Vituperative. It's a word that enjoyed the height of its popularity in the early 1800s, but is still in use today. So, vituperative. Vituperative. I think a lot of these words are maybe adjacent to rhetoric and critiquing our different rhetorical arguments. So you could definitely say that somebody's language or that somebody's point might just be a vituperative one, an ad hominem one. So vituperative. Okay. This one is complicated, and it's not just a word so much as it is a character, a concept, a figure, but I am sort of endlessly fascinated with it. So the word is demiurge. Demiurge. And you know what? I'm not positive, but I do think that demiurge is a word that we might want to go ahead and capitalize. Demiurge. Demi. So D-E-M-I. Demi. And then demiurge. U-R-G-N-E. Demiurge. Okay, so this is a word maybe you've heard, especially if you're interested in philosophy, mythology, religion. Demiurge. So the demiurge is the demiurge is a divine craftsman who shapes the physical world from Earth's materials. So let's start there, okay? So demiurge, and we'll say divine craftsman. Who shapes the world from Earth's materials. Okay. So, demiurge, divine craftsman who shapes the world from Earth's materials. And I'm going to hold that up and tell you a little bit more. So, it's important that the demiurge is seen very differently depending on who is doing the telling. So, for example, in philosophy, the demiurge is seen very often as rational and benevolent, especially according to, say, Plato, and others, the Gnostics, for example, saw the demiurge as inferior, flawed, or even sometimes adversarial, or an enemy of a benevolent God. So what I think is interesting to distinguish the demiurge from a god, for example, or the god, a god, the god, depending on your belief, is that the demiurge cannot create from nothing. The demiurge is only a shaper of things. So first, the demiurge has to have materials and can create from those materials. A god can make something from nothing. A demiurge cannot. So I think that's interesting. And like I said, you can go really deep down this rabbit hole of how demiurges are represented, but they will come up a lot in a lot of different belief systems, and especially in mythology and philosophy. So there you have it, a very brief crash course on demiurge. This next word is a word that's near and dear to my heart. Hoydenish. Hoydenish. So that's Hoydenish. Hoydenish. So this is a girl or woman boisterous, or carefree. Behavior. Okay, so hoyen, a girl or woman of saucy, boisterous, or carefree behavior. And this is a word that is sometimes taken over by the term tomboy, especially when I was growing up. You heard this word tomboy all over. I was definitely accused of being one, but the idea of a hoyden or a hoydenish is a woman who doesn't necessarily conform to the expectations of femininity in the era in which they live or in the society in which they live. And so one thing I think that's really interesting about this word is its origins. And hoydenish comes from the word meaning heathen. And so it shares, or I should say it shares the same origins as the word heathen. And I think that that reveals a lot about what society sometimes thinks of women who don't conform to these standards, especially in the past. I think the idea that a woman who didn't, who challenged the sort of mores of the time was often seen as, I mean, sometimes a witch, right? But also as mad, as possessed by the devil, and so it is not that surprising that it shares the same origins, but I think it's pretty interesting. And obviously that's not to say that I think there are certainly the same kinds of expectations that can exist, you know, if men don't conform to the modern standards of masculinity. There are lots of terrible names and assumptions they get called as well. So maybe everyone should just cool their jets, and you know, I think we're all doing just fine. So, but anyway, I think it's an interesting word, and I think that it is an interesting origin. So, okay, the next word is a nice word, bonhomie. Bonhomie. Earlier we had a word that we take from the Italian. This is a word that comes from French, bonhomie. And it is spelled B-O-N-H-O-M-I-E, bonhomie, bonhomie. And bonhomie just means friendliness or congeniality. So friendliness, congeniality. A nice word. Okay. So bonhomie, friendliness, congeniality, bonhomie, right there. And so somebody could exude good humor and bonhomie. These are the best people to be around sometimes too, right? Just people who are genuinely friendly. They just kind of light up a room. So bonhomie. Okay. So the next word is invidious. Invidious. So that's I-N-V-I-D, invid. And you as invidious. This is only tangentially related, but I heard that the founder of Nvidia, his parents, I guess, spent all the money they had to send him to a boarding school, and he because they thought it was a really good school that would give him his best chance at success, and it turned out to be a boarding school for wayward children, like a reform school. I'm not sure if that's completely true. I saw it on the internet though, so it must be. Anyway, invidious. So, invidious is of an unpleasant or objectionable nature or obnoxious. Okay, so of an unpleasant or invidious of an unpleasant or objectionable nature. So, again, a lot of times you do hear this used to classify people's comments, invidious remarks. So, people can say things that are invidious. But again, the origin of this word is interesting. So it comes from the Latin invidia, and you might know that that is the Latin word for envy. And so invidious is a word that can mean envious. But that's not typically how it's used anymore. It is used in a more pejorative sense to describe something causing resentment. And of course, resentment can be a byproduct of envy. So, but invidious of an unpleasant or objectionable nature, or just obnoxious. Next is the word apocryphal. Apocryphal. And I actually, I'm already spelling it wrong too. Okay, so it's A-P-O-C, apocryphal. R-Y, apocryphal, C-R-Y, P-H-A-L, apocryphal. Apocryphal. I actually almost said the word apocryphal when I was talking about that story about the guy from Nvidia, because it might be an apocryphal story. So, apocryphal is a word that I think is actually a pretty commonly used word, but I've included it because I think it's very, very useful in today's climate, where sound bites, headlines, rumors, they become fact the moment they're posted. And so I think apocryphal ideas are at kind of an all-time high. Also, when we talk about, again, in this country, we talk about our founding fathers a lot and what they did or didn't intend. A lot of times we invoke apocryphal stories or ideas about who they were and who they weren't. And these things are just not actually true, even though they're pretty widely understood to be true. So, apocryphal, and this means of doubtful authenticity. doubtful, authenticity. It can also be used interchangeably with the word spurious, apocryphal. So, of doubtful authenticity. So, for example, like talking about our founding fathers, the people who we credit for founding this country. George Washington. Most Americans know a story about George Washington that involves a cherry tree and George Washington cutting it down and then not being able to lie about it because he's just so honest. So this is a well-known example of an apocryphal story that's used to myth-make George Washington rather than represent who he really was. And that's not to say I'm not trying to cast aspersions at George Washington. Don't at me if you're a Washington fanboy. Just saying that this story we know was created by Parson Weems. Parson Weems was one of Washington's first biographers, and he used it to illustrate Washington's honesty and virtue, even as a young boy. And so, while perhaps those qualities about him were true or largely true, this particular story was not. It was used more like a parable or a tall tale about him to help illustrate the fact. So that's apocryphal. Okay. Mendacity is our next word. Mendacity. This is a similar, or at least a related word. Mendacity. So it's MENDACITY. Mendacity. And this is untruthfulness or lying. So untruthfulness or lying. And mendacity differs from what's apocryphal in that it is just an outright lie, right? A lot of things that are apocryphal usually are not spread intentionally as lies. They're just spread so virally that people assume that they are true. And with mendacity, this is just untruthfulness. This is lying. Mendacity. So, for example, a concurrence rife with mendacity, right? Something that's just full of mendacity, full of lies. Mendacity. So, the audacity to exercise such mendacity. And that actually brings us to our final word, and this one is not a word that is, again, outside of common usage. It's just a kind of word that I'm really interested in, and that is the plural nouns we use to describe animals. So different species of animals, we use different plural nouns to describe them. You might have heard of a murder of crows, a parliament of rooks. So you may have heard this one, and it is the word unkindness, for an unkindness of ravens. An unkindness of ravens. So let's write it. Unkindness ravens. Okay, so an unkindness of ravens just means a group of ravens, right? A collective noun for these birds. So a group of ravens. And I think the reason I started thinking about unkindness of ravens is because I do think that a lot of collective nouns for animals come from some level of apocryphal understanding or storytelling about groups of animals. So I wanted to honestly speak up on the behalf of ravens. I live close to many ravens. Dr. and Mrs. Quarkleston are ravens in my neighborhood, and they're good people. So, I told them I'd have a word with you all. So, an unkindness of ravens comes from this apocryphal idea that ravens are really, really cruel, really unkind, right? This is a misunderstanding of raven behavior. So, people used to believe that ravens were especially mean, and this was bolstered by a lot of stories, right? A lot of folk tales, fables, just so stories. They a lot of times cast ravens as tricksters. Obviously, even certain religions and mythologies believe ravens to be tricksters. So, and that didn't help their reputation. But ravens are actually very loyal, loving mates. They will be very, very fiercely protective of their mates and their children, and they're diligent parents. They take really good care of their babies and of their nests and of their children. They have been observed bringing food to and protecting other sick ravens, starting a meal train for the ravens in need. And so I think that this term, unkindness of ravens, well, very, very interesting, is something we really need to rethink. So that's my pitch to you. I do believe that there are other collective nouns sometimes used for ravens. Usually there's more than one for groups of animals, but if you have any that are your favorites, please let me know. There's some really fantastic ones out there. So, but before we go, I'm going to put this pencil back in the case, and we're just going to go over one more time the flashcards. This can be a great way to just make sure that these ideas are sticking in your head. And so, oops, put that in there. And I thought that I had brought too many note cards, but look, we only had 3 left, so I guess it's on you to tell me a few of your favorite words so I can finish off the stack, huh? Okay, so I'm going to pull this camera back up for just a second so I don't have to crouch forward. Okay, so let's go ahead and go over one more time the note cards that we've made, and yeah. Okay, so maybe we'll go backward. Okay. So, and actually, I'm just realizing I should have written definitions on one side and words on the other, but I did not, so sorry. Okay, so the first one though is spindrift. Spindrift. Spindrift is sea spray. Sea spray. Spindrift. Sea spray. The next word is mellifluous. Mellifluous. Mellifluous is sweet or musical, pleasant to hear. Mellifluous. Mellifluous. Victuals. Victuals. And this is food usable by people. Victuals. Victuals. Delectation. Delectation. Delectation means delight or enjoyment. Delectation means delight or enjoyment. Petard. Petard. Petard is a small bomb, often used in the phrase hoist with one's own. Petard. Petard. Intransigent. Intransigent. Intransigent means uncompromising. Uncompromising. Calumny. Calumny. A misrepresentation intended to harm another's reputation. Calumny. Misrepresentation intended to harm another's reputation. Shambolic. Shambolic. Chaotic, disorganized, or mismanaged. Chaotic, disorganized, or mismanaged. Shambolic. Guga or chiga or giga. A showy trifle, a bauble or trinket. A showy trifle, a bauble or a trinket. Bromide. Commonplace or tiresome person, or a commonplace or hackneyed statement or notion. Bromide. Anhedonia. Anhedonia is the inability to experience pleasure in normally pleasurable acts. Anhedonia. Prolixity. Prolixity. The state of being unnecessarily wordy or long-winded. Prolixity. occupying a position at or on both sides of a boundary or threshold. Liminal, occupying a position at or on both sides of a boundary or threshold. Donnybrook, a scene of uproar and disorder, a heated argument. Donnybrook, Donnybrook. Grimalkin, a cat or a spiteful old woman. Grimalkin, a cat or a spiteful old woman. There we go. Horripilation, a bristling of the hair on the head or body from excitement or fright. Horripilation, a bristling of the hair on the head or body from excitement or fright. Sorry, it's so warm. Pellucid, translucently clear. Pellucid, translucently clear. And remember that can apply to words in communication as well as physical objects like water or the sky. Tommyrot, Tommyrot, nonsense or rubbish. Tommyrot, nonsense or rubbish. Xenosign, the sense that time is moving faster and faster, especially as one grows older. Xenosign. Sensorium, sensorium. The apparatus of an organism's perception considered as a whole. Sensorium. Omerta, omerta. A code of silence, especially to the authorities. Omerta. Paplum. Worthless, empty ideas. Paplum. Paplum. And remember, that comes from the old-fashioned infant cereal kind of. I think it was made of sort of like a wheat paste, like a paste of kind of like a cream of wheat kind of situation. I think it was something like that. So paplum, 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 paplum. Cottywomple. Cottywomple. To travel with purpose to an unknown destination. To Cottywomple. Pulchritudinous. Pulchritudinous. Beautiful. Pulchritudinous. Beautiful. Vituperative. Vituperative. Bitter and abusive. Vituperative. Demiurge. Demiurge. Divine craftsman who shapes the world from Earth's materials. Divine craftsman who shapes the world from Earth's materials. Demiurge. Hoydenish. Hoydenish. This describes a girl or woman of saucy, boisterous, or carefree behavior. Describes a girl or woman of saucy, boisterous, or carefree behavior, much like a tomboy. Hoydenish. Bonhomie. Bonhomie. Friendliness, congeniality. Friendliness or congeniality. Bonhomie. Invidious. Invidious. Of an unpleasant or objectionable nature. Invidious. Of an unpleasant or objectionable behavior. Invidious. Of an unpleasant or objectionable nature. Apocryphal. Of doubtful authenticity. Of doubtful authenticity. Mandacity. Untruthfulness or lying. Mandacity. Untruthfulness. Lying. And finally, an unkindness of ravens, the collective noun for a group of ravens that may not be entirely accurate. With that, I thank you again so much for watching. I hope that this was informative and mostly relaxing, and I will see you all very, very soon with some fresh F1 content, and I hope you'll love it. After that, I'll be back with some old-fashioned role plays that I hope you'll really enjoy, and lots more. So, thanks so much, and I'll see you soon. Bye.